Podcasting since 2005. This is the King of Podcasts radio network. kingofpodcasts.com.
Someone actually wrote a book about getting into the radio business in 2025.
The King of Podcasts radio network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast. Here is the King of Podcasts.
Happy 4th of July from yours truly, King of Podcasts and the Broadcasters Podcast, as we broadcast to you tonight, episode 391. It is a slow week in the world of media, and part of it is I don't want to talk about anything political because, yes, Paramount and CBS had to go ahead and pay the president in another settlement that was done by media. We're not talking about that. I'm not going to talk about Diddy being mostly acquitted of most of the heinous charges like racketeering and major prostitution charges. He got cleared of that, so we're not going to talk about that either. And in terms of movies, I'm not going to talk about Jurassic World Rebirth. Just not interested. Another reboot of a reboot of a reboot? No. That's enough. I think I saw the first Jurassic Park, maybe the second one, and that's it. I'm not going farther than that. Sorry. No. It's not one of those movies I'm going to go back for. Maybe I'll go tomorrow to rewatch F1 or Ballerina, but I mean, I'm still on the fence about it. I don't know if I want to go. Maybe if I get a little bit fed up of the fireworks that go on in my house around here on the weekend, just depending on, we'll figure it out. But since it is a quiet week in media, I did need to go and dig around looking for what they're going to talk about tonight, but I found something that was fascinating. And you know what? Sometimes when I just do a little Google search around, I'll find something that's just going to catch my attention. And this week, it's very amazing. There's a new ebook that has come out to explore radio careers for the next generation. So radiotoday.co.uk wrote this story and put it out to a new ebook that's available for download. And I did. So a new free ebook aiming to help students explore modern careers in radio and audio. This caught my attention. And look, my thing is that the cynical mind that has been radio, newspaper, television, and podcasting for over 30 years, I wanted to go ahead and take this with a grain of salt. And I wanted to go ahead and chastise what was being said here, if there was any good advice coming in this. But I want to go ahead and take some of this in a constructively critical role. And I do want to add some real world experience into what I know about it, because I think it would be a good idea to go and do that. So here's what I got. The book is called Sound Advice, A Guide to Navigating Careers in the Modern and Future Radio Digital Media Landscape. Now, you can find the book at radiocopywriters.com. Radiocopywriters.com. That is where you can find this free ebook, and it's available for download. You don't have to do anything. No asking for an email address, nothing. You just go right there. They have a download link. You can actually go ahead and find it for yourself. So the book was written by broadcaster Earl Pilkington, and the guide was designed for secondary school and university students considering creative, technical, and commercial roles in today's radio industry. Now, this is in the UK, and what I must say ahead of time is that radio in Europe and in other areas outside of the United States, yeah, there is a place where radio is important and radio still matters. Whether it's streaming or whether it's on DAB, DAB or DAB+, or whether it's on FM or AM, it still matters. So Earl has 40 years of experience in broadcasting. He says that most radio career guides have not been updated since the 1990s, and there's a good reason why. When the internet changed, the digital disruption came in. Yeah, things just started changing, and we know that there was a lot of interest in new technology. And so there have been quite a few pioneers that have come to the space. We talked about it last week with the advent of Apple, including podcasting in iTunes 20 years ago last week. Last 30 of the day. So he offers an overview of current and emerging roles across on-air programming, engineering, sales, digital content, and voice tech. The question has to be, if you're going to get into the business of radio, is you need to figure out what the radio environment is right now where you live. Because we know in the current American radio environment, if I want to go and apply what this person's thinking about possibilities of working in radio, let me give you the landscape. The landscape of radio right now is this. Yeah, of these companies that are here, of the major corporate operations that are running radio stations, they also have other departments. Podcasting is one of those. They have marketing, advertising. They have a few things that you can go and work off of that you can find your way into. Obviously, they'll take on salespeople if they can try to sell, whatever they want. But the thing is that we have radio companies that have the majority of radio stations, of the majority of the highest wattage Class A, Class B radio stations. So let's say between 10,000 and 100,000 watts of radiated power on AM or FM radio. And the big corporations in all top 100 markets, let's just say, they have a stranglehold on those stations. They don't operate at a very profitable level. Most of these radio companies are holding debt. They barely make any profit off of what they make. Some of them are financially, they are publicly traded to the point where their stocks are very worth little. They're basically penny stocks in some cases because they've been delisted. And if you look at their debt and if you look at their balance sheets, they are always holding on to that debt because of acquisitions from the past. And then they're just basically extending their credit as much as they can because they can. And then the other part is they can also lobby with the arm of the National Association of Broadcasters to be able to go ahead and move the goalpost anytime they want. Which the most latest move, we'll talk about delete the FCC public commentary and what they're going to be doing there. Brandon Carter's already talking about the fact that he wants to go ahead and expedite and hurry up the process, which means if that initiative is going to move forward quickly, that means you're going to go right into ownership caps and removing those completely because all media says that they're competing against the internet. That there's no longer a competition between themselves. They're just fighting for survival against the internet. That's their argument. I don't think it's such a same, but that's okay. So this book in particular, this ebook, it shows information about how to enter the industry locally or internationally, advice on how to bridge the gap between traditional broadcasting and new digital media platforms. So again, for school and university career counselors, media studies educators, and job-seeking students. Because there was always something about, maybe there's something here about what could possibly be done with maybe people getting into the radio business, because there was something you see in various movies, various things that maybe will have caught the attention of someone out there to learn about it. Growing up myself, one of the movies I've said before on this program that was one of the epiphanies that got me wanting to go into radio was Pump Up the Volume. Christian Slater, Samantha Mathis. That movie got me interested in radio. I was always wanting to get into media in some way, shape, or form, but radio was it. And then also the other part was the radio stations that I got to listen to in the day. And what I got to hear previously growing up as a kid. And some of the role models that I had on radio that just had a fun time. They were amazing people. And then growing up and learning from other radio folks about who they aspired to be or who they admired from afar as well. One of the guys that I got to know in the radio business, Neil Leibowitz. He introduced me to so many different people in New York and that market of WABC. And other things like that other people in New York, other people in other markets. And then I just started exploring and just learning as much as I can about radio and the history of it, of the talent, of what was popular, because also what came with radio was the music that came on and how we all growing up, maybe not some of you now, in your teens and 20s, but those of you who are on the older side of the demographic that listen to this program, you know that you listened to radio growing up. Besides the music you listen to in your car, in your headphones, Walkman, whatever. You were going to listen to a lot of music on the radio because there's a lot of music available. Because they basically had the access that what Spotify and Apple Podcasts or iTunes gives you now, or Pandora. They were the DJs that had all the music available. And they could play a lot of things. And they could curate music for you. So every radio station was like its own playlist. Which if they were doing the right thing, they would have an expanded playlist. But they would also play a lot of new music. But they also would have a good way of filtering out new music, having it played for so much until the point we got fatigued with it. And then those songs would go away and something else new would come in. And it worked for many years. Record labels profited from it. But again, everything was based on physical units. So radio is a different beast today because of what is being asked for by radio stations now. If you really want to be in the business of radio, just remember, in the words of Mike O'Meara, it's a cruel mistress. Many people get into the radio business because we love it. And it does not pay much. Sometimes you could get into something where you might get paid well. Or you can do something where you can supplement income as a content creator to build off of and do that. I mean, there's other things you could do where you could continue to do other things to create revenue streams for yourself, be an entrepreneur, and still have radio be a part of you. That's being done now. What I see a lot of the current crop of younger talent that's out there that have gotten the opportunity to go and work on radio stations in major markets. I managed to see a handful of them out there that have tried to go and do their work as content creators. I haven't seen anyone that has really excelled doing that. I mean, it's nice. Some of them will do live streams and we'll see them in the studio and they're actually getting things set up, but really they're not doing too much because they're not getting to talk on the air. They're doing more talking with the stream on social media than they are getting to talk on the actual air. And will they get to talk live? No. Probably voice track. Are they going to get to talk to live listeners or interact with live listeners? No. They might get some messages on social media, emails, I don't know. But they're not going to get anything where they get actual interaction. Because for whatever reason now, a lot of radio stations, they're not going to allow somebody to get onto a hot mic for fear of what they might say. But when you were in radio, we used to know how to go entertain, inform, and educate an audience live. Like we knew what to do. And it's one of those things where if you are getting yourself into the mix of wanting to be a part of the radio environment, I think you'll probably do better in college radio. If there is a college radio station in the university you're at, or even in the high school that you're at, or the secondary school, whatever it is, maybe you get a chance to go do that. You should absolutely find your way into a radio station that's local, that you can get yourself into, that's small market. If you got an intern, if you got a volunteer, do whatever you got to do. I volunteered at one station in West Palm when I started. I tried to get myself engaged with some of the other radio stations in the market that were not owned by major operators, just to get in the door. But what I really got my experience from was college radio. So at Florida Atlantic University, where I went to school, we had WOWL. And at the time, it was on AM at the very end of the dial at 1610 AM. But I learned so much from that. Like, I got to make all my mistakes at WOWL. And I got to bring in people into the mix. I got to go and experience new music. I got to go and learn the process of working with record labels on promoting their music and be able to go put together good playlists, promote, put DJs on to do mix shows. I learned all that. I learned promotion. I learned publicity. I learned marketing. I learned so much from all of that. That applies to still what I do today in podcasting. But the work you get to do in radio, if you're doing podcasting or you want to get into podcasting, the experience you get at a radio station gives you discipline. Because one thing you will get from radio is it will help you become a better presenter. It'll help you be a better communicator. You might not know this, but at the end of the day, there have been many people that have come out of radio in their careers in media that have done very well and have been masters of ceremonies for whatever they have to go and be doing, whatever they're going to be offered to do. And they're also able to go ahead and work on the fly and do a lot of things. Listen, two of the most active people there have been in the last, 20 years right now that came from radio. I will say there's Ryan Seacrest, who he has had his hands on everything, okay? He got under the tutelage of Dick Clark, learned how to go and become a TV producer, producing Keeping Up with the Kardashians after all this time. Nobody ever talks about the fact that he's doing that. American Idol, hosting that show at its inception, and continued to host that show ever since. He now he's been hosting at Kiss FM in Los Angeles. First it was at Star 98.7 in Los Angeles, and then went to Kiss FM, and he now hosts multiple shows there. The morning show there, On Air with Ryan Seacrest, and he still hosts the American Top 40 broadcast, which I still detest the fact that he's doing it, but the way they're doing it now, it's the way it is. It's fine, whatever. I don't listen to it. I can't listen to that show. It's just not, that format of the charts is horrible. The media-based charts is just a bad thing, no matter what anybody else says. And especially with the stagnation we have right now, the charts, it doesn't help to listen to them now. But Ryan Seacrest, for his credit, also now hosting Wheel of Fortune. He's got his hands on everything. If you needed to go host anything, if you needed him to go and host any award show, the Oscars, the Emmys, the Tony, whatever, he could probably do it. I mean, he might not be the most adept or the most knowledgeable, but he can host. He hosts New Year's Eve every year. There's a reason why he does all this and he's in command. Is he the best? No, but he is a functional and serviceable host. He can get the job done. He may not be the best, but he is adaptable. He's capable, more than capable to do any of this work on television, on radio, social, whatever. Then there's Steve Harvey. We don't hear much about him, but of course he came from comedy, moved over to radio, and been doing radio for a long time. He still does it now. He's heard on hundreds of stations around the country. You have him doing Family Feud, which is now going to be, I think it's 16 years now on the air, maybe a little bit more than that. I'm not sure. I thought it was 2009. I think he started. I forget. But he's been doing that show forever. He had his own talk show for a while until he let that go. But another person, again, has this line of Suits. He has different things he's doing as well, just in general. He's writing books, multifaceted. And of course, Steve Harvey, except for that one little mistake of, announcing the wrong person at Miss Universe, otherwise, he was doing just fine. He knew what to do. Nick Cannon was another example. Let's just put that out there, okay? Because, we saw him for a while doing America's Got Talent. But before that, he also doing radio too. He did morning show. I think he still does now. I forget if he still does it or not. I think he does over in New York still. But some people just have a way to go ahead and be able to communicate and do that. But people that came from radio beforehand were always multifaceted and able to go ahead and entertain, educate, inform. They were able to go ahead and present. They could be in front of a camera, in front of a microphone, and they would know what to do. Because we knew how to adapt with theater of the mind. Because all you're doing in podcasting is, listen, if you don't have anybody else working with you, you don't have any guests to rely on, or a lot of information to grow and rely on, a radio presenter, much like a podcast presenter, to be a great podcaster, you can be in front of this microphone and not have anything in front of you for prep. Like right now, as I'm recording this episode, I looked at that one clip from Radio Today, the one page I just got up there, and there's the ebook, which I got to go and bring up in a minute. But for the last 15 minutes, I've just been off the cuff. I've ad-libbed. Because you got to be able to go and have a way of talking, because you're disciplined to it. You have to know what your format is. I try to stick myself to a 60-minute format for this program. If you're in radio, you have to support the commercials that are going to be on the air. You have to support the sponsors. You have to be able to go ahead and make sure that you keep the ship running, because on top of the fact you're hosting, many times you're doing other things behind the scenes. You might be producing the program. You might be taking callers or taking feedback, whatever there is, doing emails, or you might be doing some engineering. Who knows what you might be doing? But in radio, if you're coming into the space, the reason why all those people came in, and look, if I want to talk about like the past of people, think about all these game show hosts we've had on that have been working forever, right? We had game show hosts that all came from radio. Dick Clark came from radio. You had Bob Eubanks, Wing Martindale, Pat Sajak. They all came from radio. Alex Trebek. They all came from radio. And if they didn't come from radio, then they have to come from somewhere where you have to be able to know what to do on the fly. Comedians are always good to go and do things like that. But it still comes down to the fact that if you're doing radio, if you are funny, if you're insightful, if you're entertaining, if you can keep an audience listening to you for minutes and then hours on end, they'll stick around to listen to your sponsors, listen around to your content, and you're not reliant on what the content might be that you have to go and get prepped for, or other people having to go and be there to bounce off that you could talk to, or having guests. If you can do it on your own and monologue, and you can be able to go and have a good show, and people will go ahead and listen to that on a regular basis, then you know how to podcast. And it all comes from doing radio. The radio component is you learn in a structure, because podcasting can be free form. But the best podcasters out there kind of have a format in place, and they kind of know what they're doing in terms of the structure. You stick to the kind of like around the same amount of time, the content you're doing. You just want to make sure that you're not wasting people's time. You get to the content. You want to get to what you need to go and talk about, what you plan to talk about as a topic. And then when you're done, you're done. In this program, when I do this, sometimes I don't go an hour. The plan is to do that, but I don't need to go and stretch to an hour. Now, in radio, you do need to stretch to whatever time frame you have. Most likely an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. So for talk radio, which is a different beast in itself, you'll either have sports talk or you'll have political talk. And that's different. It's a different bag to go through, because in politics, you do need to go and, you have to have identified what is your stance. If you're doing sports, you got to be able to know at least something of what you're talking about in whichever sport you're talking about. And for sports radio, I mean, if you're in a major market, you should be aware and be very familiar with all the sports that are playing in that city. So that's why there's some people that will talk about the fact that when you're watching people on television trying to go and talk about sports and all these different studio shows, yeah, they're not so knowledgeable, but put them on radio, they're pretty good. Because if you get people that are coming from radio, you got to be knowledgeable. Like if they can do it on their own, they must be able to do something. And of course, there's people in radio that are not the best in the world that, especially coming out of sports or coming from, politics. There are people that just know how to go ahead and fill time, fill a program with the same kind of thing that everybody's familiar with. And then people just know how to go ahead and listen in and take in what's being talked about. That's it. In the ebook itself, okay, again, this is Sound Advice, a guide to navigating careers in the modern and future radio digital media landscape. So in the book, they talk about the evolution of the radio industry that has transformed, and that modern radio stations are now home to a wide array of professionals, AI specialists, data analysts, podcast producers, and social media strategists, alongside traditional roles like producers, copywriters, and management teams. That might be a different story in other markets outside of the U.S., but there are not that many people that are working these particular tasks. There are not jobs that are just made for, okay, here's somebody that's an AI specialist, it's a full-time job. Or a data analyst, that's a full-time job. No. Some of this is quite outsourced, okay? But then also at the same time, you probably have somebody that's in there that's working as a bit of a lackey, but they're very useful because they're multifaceted, multi-skilled, multi-talented, that they might have to be an AI specialist. They might have to be a podcast producer, a social media strategist. They might have to produce. They might have to copyright. And who knows, they might have to manage other people. I mean, in my department, when I worked at Clear Channel, I mean, I was a board operator, but I also was a producer. I had to go and help out in coordination with other programs. I had to go and work on commercial management and inventory for commercials that were coming in for network that we had to go ahead and honor, things like that. there was quite a bit I was doing, and also managing other stations and making sure those stations were operating and staying on the air. So I had to go and work with other people, and I had to go know an idea of what I was doing, because that's a lot to go ahead and take on. Now, a lot of it was oversight, but for the most part, I did that. And when I was offered, okay, can I do some commercial voiceovers? Sure. Can I do anything in terms of producing a show that, because we have a brokered show on, we have a show that is being paid for, a paid program, or a program that's being brought on because we have a sponsor on it? Well, I have to be able to go ahead and know what the host or whatever that client is asking for in the program to make sure everything is all set. So if I got to make sure to be a phone screener, to produce on the fly, to cue the host on what they're doing right then and there, to get their clips played, all of it. I mean, morning shows might get a lot of staffing because it's just, they got the money for it. But I can tell you many times where I had to go in and work basically what might have been 3 or 4 jobs in one sitting, doing something for a radio program to make sure it's all being taken care of and done. Now, in this book, they also talk about the specific role that there are certain core themes prevalent across most positions. You need to be adaptable, multi-skilled, technologically savvy. You have to be motivated for self-education, cross-cultural storytelling, maintaining a human connection. Yeah, you got to be knowledgeable. You got to be able to network. But you also need to go and understand that when you're coming into the environment of the people that you're working with, there have been some people that have been in the radio business that have gone through, and they remember what it was like when they first came into business and how enjoyable it was, or just the excitement of being in the business, getting to be creative, getting to be a little bit more into things. But the more and more we have people that are not working in radio or not radio minded, that are operating these radio stations only for trying to make a profit, and they don't even do a good job of that. They don't know how to manage radio talent, the people that actually help them make the money. Besides the sales staff that will bring the money in, they got to have somebody that they got to pay attention and take care of the talent and the staff that are actually doing the work in between, because the commercials only stand for 10 or 20 minutes of an hour-long program. So somebody else has to come in and do that. For a talk radio station, you might have a 3 to 5 minute segment of news. Sports might have the same thing. Maybe have a weather check or a traffic check, whatever. But then there's also 45 minutes right there that somebody's got to be filled that time. And not all those shows are syndicated. You got to have somebody that knows what they're doing to be able to fill the gap that is the biggest gap. You got to take care of those people. But just got to tell you, in the corporate environment, just like any corporate environment, you don't get appreciated much. But the exposure of where you're going to be, if you're smart enough to know, okay, this is a transitional place to be. Like if I'm in this market, in this station, in this format, in the future, I could put on my resume, I worked for this company, this market, worked for these stations, and move up the ladder. Because eventually what you're trying to do is you're trying to make yourself that your talent is so important that you're irreplaceable, and that you are so profitable to the company that they will bend over backwards to keep you and spend on you and invest on you, especially if you're doing a lot for them, more than beyond. And then you have leverage. You just got to be able to go and push hard to say, listen, you are nothing without me, and you make yourself irreplaceable. In radio, you can still do that. There are people that can still find their way to do that because they are working their way up. But that's a very limited amount of people that they get their radio shows to be very popular. They can get their radio shows to expand to other audiences, because one of the things that radio companies do want to do in this corporate age is they want to be able to go ahead and make it where they don't have to go ahead and program for every local station they have. They want to be able to syndicate. They want to be able to have programming that will resonate in different markets, so they don't have to go ahead and pay for other talent to come in. When they get to have somebody to go ahead that will satisfy the market, one market that they're based out of, and that same kind of format will resonate on other stations, regardless of location, regardless of maybe the cultural change, whatever there might be. So they go in the roles of diverse career categories. Programming is what I know best, but they talk about who's there. Now, program directors, which I am a program director for CannabisRadio.com and WMR.fm, but I've gotten to do that job for a long time, and there's a lot of plates to spin working in those areas. Honor talent, which of course everybody wants to go and become, but you have to work your way there. You have to work in the grueling grunt type jobs of production or promotions or something else. You got to work your way up. If you might remember, I played the interview with Joe Portavilla, that where he went through was, he went into college and then he found his way through an internship and he found himself in the biggest market in the country. Just because he was going to go and connect himself with the right people, network, and he found a way to get liked and get noticed and said, well, somebody will bring along. Because what happens too, very important, especially in the corporate environment too, radio is really big about when you get in with somebody of importance, of stroke that has real leverage. They know a lot of people. They can make major decisions. They can help influence decisions. And, my friend Lou Pate will go and tell you this, which I'm going to probably go on with him tomorrow. He's going to be broadcasting out of Philadelphia. I'll be on that show with him tomorrow for an hour, and I'll take that interview and what I can take from there, I'll go ahead and play it back here on the program. I'll put it up as a podcast for everybody to hear as an extra, as a bonus. But with Lou Pate, he says the same thing. And many radio people that have been veterans of the business, they'll tell you, it's not what you know, it's who you know. But that also works in corporate as well. It is who you know. You have to create rapport. You have to create relationships. Maybe with people you might not necessarily bond with really well, but for the sake of business, you need to go and leverage, you need to go and get close to, and you need to be able to go ahead and create a bond. Because, as always, certain radio professionals that have some kind of leverage, they have some kind of status within the company, they'll always bring people along with them that they like. Almost like a nepotism. It's really like that. There's also news and content roles, which that's not as much as there once were, but there is some things where if you are trying to gather information and you're using AI or using other sources to go ahead and gather that information, and you need to make sure to go ahead and compartmentalize whatever news or information you're going to use into a program on radio, somebody's got to be able to do that. Then you have engineers that are behind the sound. Now, when it comes to chief engineers or technical managers, studio engineers, I will say this, is that you're not necessarily going to have a lot of those jobs as well, because I can tell you that with some of the people I've worked with, if you're an engineer in the radio space, if you know how to go and work on antennas and towers and, work on compressors and limiters and all the back end into a grid, servers, everything like that, those people, there's only so many of those spots available. But if you're that knowledgeable and you're able to go and have that technical savvy, you're going to get a lot of work. One of the guys I remember working with, it was not just at Clear Channel. He worked for other stations across the board. The guy had access to one of the major towers that carried a lot of radio stations called the Eiffel Tower, where I am in West Palm Beach, a 500-foot tower. And this guy was pretty good at being able to go ahead and take care of all these stations, plus the Christian radio stations, plus the public radio stations, plus subcarriers, so much more. But he was doing pretty well. Now, he was a bit on call, and there might be times day and night he has to go ahead and work out on something that has to be done, but the work is there, and he's doing pretty well working on that. Then, of course, there's other roles in radio, salespeople, and then you can move up to management. But again, management, it just depends, because you're going to be pencil pushers. What kind of things will management allow you to do when it comes to the ownership, when it comes to the regional directors or the other directors that are going to be overseeing clusters of stations? Like, there's program directors and there's also operational managers for clusters of stations, because a lot of times these big corporate companies, they have all the radio stations in one building, all in one spot, and there's somebody that's going to be able to answer to the corporate brass about everything that's going on, and then all the directors, program directors, music directors, whatever there might be, they're all going to answer to this operations manager, to the regional manager, then up to the top. And that's how it works. They also talk about digital and emerging roles in the book, and that's digital managers that orchestrate the online experience across various platforms, which would have been webmasters back in the day, but now it's something much different. With the websites, a lot of them are just very cookie cutter and templated, and they all look the same, especially on corporate sites. But websites are not the big thing for some of these stations. What it is for the digital side is that making sure that you have a live stream that's going out there and being promoted and programmed when you have social media and the platforms you have therein, that, people will know and be familiar with those radio stations. So you might get a bit of an audience on social media. And the one thing is you just got to learn, if you're able to go ahead and incorporate real, organic, lively, viral content on social media, and you can repurpose that, you can make it so that you create a gateway, a connection to the radio station. Like, everything is all about, can you get something back to the radio station for people to go and listen to? That's the part you got to figure out. But in radio, there's not that much out there. It's very difficult. So some of the things that were picked out in this book, some quotes that were pulled out from this book I want to go and bring up. They said, first of all, if you're picturing just a DJ behind a microphone, you're in for a surprise. It is far more than just that. Absolutely correct. You're not just going to get to be on the air and talking. It just doesn't happen that way. I mean, it's very rare somebody is going to have that opportunity, unless they're really good at it. Now, back in the day, it used to be a thing where if you had a good voice and you knew how to talk, you might get a chance to go on the air right away. And you might have some help, somebody producing the show for you. But now, it's a much different story. You need to know more than just being able to talk. You have to be able to do that. They say the world of radio is more dynamic and full of opportunity more than ever before. Well, there's podcasting. There's other ancillary things that the radio station has now to try to continue to keep their relevance, because you now have to do much more than just try to bring people to listening to the station in their car, because it's much more difficult for people to listen to. You might get them to listen on their smart speaker, which is what they've been trying to do. You might get them to go and stream the station on the corporate company's app, whether it's iHeartRadio or TuneIn or whatever, or the Odyssey app. You might be able to do that, but the thing is, you have to be able to draw people there. You got to be able to have social media savvy. You got to be able to have promotional savvy. We don't have the contests that used to be out there where money and trips and prizes were given out. That would be a long-standing practice for radio stations to keep people listening to their stations. It's not there anymore. So where's the incentive for people to go and listen in? You got to be able to find them on social media. And the other thing, too, is that with all these good podcasts out there and all these different programs that are out there that are long form, using social media to go and put something that's piecemeal, that's small, that's easy to go ahead and absorb, to then draw them to listen or watch something that's much longer, just like trailers to movies. You got to have something that's going to go and make people invest in the fact that, okay, I'm going to put money down. I'm going to go ahead and invest watching or listen to this content. This long-form content, because there's much more besides the clips or teasers I'm listening to that I want to listen to. They also said that the most successful people in the industry have tried different roles, learned from various experiences, and eventually found their perfect fit. Well, but you don't know where you're going to come from, how you're going to get there. And I can tell you, people from promotions have absolutely made their way up into on air. And many people have gone different ways to get to where they need to go to get on air. If you are in radio, or you have been in radio, sometimes you're fascinated by how certain people that you see in the building, how they're able to go and move themselves to on air or to doing something else within the program department. How do they get there? They had to do something. It's not even so much that you need to have a high school or college degree. You don't even necessarily have a college degree or go through a broadcasting school to do that. Of course, there's broadcasting schools. Of course, there are areas like that. The Connecticut School of Broadcasting has done a great job of the fact that they can go ahead and bring people on board to pay, a certain amount of tuition for a 6-week course. But what they're doing is they're basically setting up a recruitment hub for companies like iHeartRadio to say, okay, we'll bring on interns, but we're only going to take people from this place that went through this pipeline. And that's it. They won't take it from anywhere else. Because if you're not going through a particular recognized and familiar route to get to radio, it's very difficult. And I tried everything to get in the radio. I remember somebody giving me the idea of like, okay, you want to put your resume into something that will grab the attention of somebody to look at your resume. Put your resume into an old shoe box. Put some old shoes in there and send the resume in like that. Or put it into like something manila folder, put it in there with something else just to grab the attention of the program director or whoever you're trying to get to read your resume. And I went through every different way of trying to get every program director in the state, in the city, to listen to me. I took interviews. I would try to get into the building just to go and talk to somebody. I tried. The one way I got in after all for myself was I went to a job fair that our radio was actually, or Clear Channel was actually hosting. And the sales team was there, and the general sales manager was there. I forget his first name, but his last name was Brady, I'm pretty sure. And I remember I showed him my resume, and I talked to him. I was like, I'm trying to get in talking to somebody within the company. And I told him the program directors I was trying to talk to. Jim Edwards, I tried to. Jordan Walsh, I tried to. I talked to everybody I tried to get into in there. And I couldn't get anybody to hear me out. So I tried. And I took interviews. And of course, I got humbled by some of those interviews. I talked to Les Howard Jacoby that, when I showed him, he checked out an air check of mine that I put up together to get onto a radio station. And I was like, he gave me some pointers, but he did kind of humble me at the same time. Tony Banks down at Y100, I got to go and visit the Clear Channel cluster in Miami, Florida. And, it was nice to get down there and to get just familiar with the building and just see what would happen with it. But I tried to get in with certain people to see. Oh, Steve Lapp I talked to as well. That's right. He was over at WOVV back in the day, 95.5 WOVV. It was a top 40 radio station. I tried to get into there as well. And these were either small ownership or small companies, or they were larger. But over the 90s, I tried everything to try to get into a radio station. I tried everything I could. It was so difficult to get somebody on the phone as well. That was so difficult. But that choice of going to the job fair, which was not that busy anyway, which was the good thing. Talking to that general sales manager, he gave my resume to John Manzo, excuse me. Oh my goodness. Chris Marino worked at Wild. John Manzo was who I talked to, who's had quite a career for himself. And he's the one that gave me a chance. He let me work on the board operation, on the board to go and operate syndicated programming on Saturday nights. And I got someone that was, has always been very good to me all these years, that helped me, train me into learning the Prophet software to get myself familiar. And then, I got to work in there for 4 years plus. A couple of years, I was doing part-time for about 6 months, and then things just happened. Like the overnight shift was opened up because the weekends, one guy, he got let go. And the other person left. And for a while, I was working 7 days a week overnights. And then I went ahead and helped train the next person that would work weekends with me, take those 2 nights off, and then we were set. And then I said I was only going to be here for a couple of years. I got into podcasting where I've been at right now ever since. But then I also went back to radio because I still needed to supplement my income. Like, it was nice. I was working where I was at, but I still need to make more money coming in. So I went back to Clear Channel, and Brian Mudd, who had been there, and he's still there today, working as a program director and doing quite a bit of work there for a long time. But I'll tell you, for me, I got a chance to go back there. I did board op work. I did some production, a little bit of here and there. And it was still nice to be behind the board and being in that environment. Like, it still, at the end of the day, was something that I really enjoyed. And I learned a lot from it. Because everything I got from radio helped me disciplined on how to go ahead and handle programming today. Timing, presentation. Like, I now have to go ahead and manage talent that comes in. People that are not completely familiar with doing podcasting or doing radio in an intimate setting like this, to train them. And there's a lot to it. If I had to go through everything I'm doing right now in order to train, coach, educate, and help build a radio show from nothing to being very successful. It still happens today. Like, there's still one show we did that was on psychedelics that it was two hosts bouncing back and forth, but also I had to go and make sure I managed their expectations. At the same time, I helped them like kind of figure out what they needed to go and do to make their show better. You know, not stumble around the words to what they were talking about and what they could be talking about more, looking at the stats and seeing what topics work better than others. And it would help to build the shows to become big. And there was one show I did with them that, you know, in 6 months, tens of thousands of downloads overnight. And they got it. And I worked with them for a year, and they decided to continue to do the show on their own, but still, we helped them get to that point. And that was a big deal. It was satisfying to go and do that. But it's a normal thing for us because in radio, we work like this. Like, I mean, of the podcasting company that I work with right now and the networks we operate, everyone that's working on right now in this format, they've all worked in media. They've all worked in radio. I mean, it's what we do. It's embedded in our brain. We just know that this is something we took from there and we brought it in. A few more quotes that came from this ebook. The future of radio is digital, dynamic, and full of opportunities for innovative professionals like you. The thing is that in today's environment, you need to know that if you're a content creator or influencer, people don't learn how to go ahead and kind of figure out their ground and how to eventually learn their niche. I mean, think about it for podcasters. Of the ones that are very notable, remember, they all went through changes. Like Joe Rogan had a bunch of people on his show at one point. But I mean, how many years did it take for him to hone the craft of being a better interviewer, to hosting a show and having a format that people really resonate with? Same thing with Alex Wagner. Call Her Daddy wasn't an overnight sensation. It was just like it figured things out. She was working with a different outfit, and she had a co-host back then, and they just kind of figured out. They took the raw content they were putting together, and they put it into a way that worked. And remember, how many of those that we watch on YouTube or listen to online all have taken things from radio? Because remember, when you look at the format of, before Joe Rogan, we had the Howard Stern format. The reason why everybody's feeling comfortable with having a microphone in front of them like they do, not having a lavalier where you just like pin it on you and it's not that visible. No, Howard Stern was the one 35 years ago that we saw with his microphone in the studio watching him do his show. And everybody saw the environment that it was and was fascinated by the fact that it was a 30-minute format. We saw it all chopped down and it was great. And it was a great gateway for people to go and listen to his 4-hour plus show every weekday. But many people still follow that kind of format. They might see what, the old Tonight Show might look like, or the current late night show setup is as well. People figure it out. And there's a couple different ways that people are going to do podcasting in a certain set. But if you are in radio, you also do that. Plus, we also know that certain radio shows still do well as a podcast. Breakfast Club is a great example. That's a morning show out in New York City. And we see it as a podcast and how it's presented out there. And they're doing more content as well. But it's like, okay, it works. Charlamagne the God, he also does other shows. I mean, if he wants to go on and be a pundit on a news station, he can do that. If he wants to go on somewhere else, he can do that too. But everybody figures it out. And you find a way when you're doing these radio shows, you find who you are, you find your voice, and then you get an audience. And you find a way to retain that audience, get sponsors in, because those sponsors, how many times are you getting a commercial that these sponsors want to come in and sponsor your program? We're not hearing commercials necessarily that are all fully produced and zoom zam, all these different sound effects and things like that. Not anymore. Because the commercials we hear out there on podcasting, it's people, the person that is there doing a live read or an as live read of what it is. And you do it, and it's the reputation, the integrity of the host that sells the sponsorship, sells the advertising to folks out there. And how many times are they getting a sponsorship where it's following a promo code, which means it's based on cost per click or cost per measurement? They need to be able to know these companies They're not just going to put a price out there. They're going to go and pay you scaled on cost per measurement because they can do that too. It's all this here. They also say now that the industry needs fresh voices, new perspectives, and innovative thinkers. But you got to find the environment where you can do it because there's not a lot of stations that are very enterprise worthy. You have some local owners that are coming into the space to buying stations, and that's great. But even they are still looking to go and make a profit. How much creativity is being allowed in radio? Because the creativity is not necessarily in radio, but radio needs creative people once again. People need to come to radio if they can come in the radio that can entertain, that are competent, and be able to go ahead and program a music format. And maybe bringing on hosts or guests, and bringing on people that will go ahead and come on the air, be on the microphone, and be able to engage an audience 24/7. And do live reads for sponsorships, or go to an event and broadcast on location. Things like that. If you're really going to do all that, you can make yourself a pretty decent living in radio, and also you become popular. You become famous. In some cases, many people in radio become famous, at least locally, or at least people will recognize who they are. The peers in the business will know who they are. It happens like that. But to close out the discussion here about getting a career in radio, it makes you very competent to do a lot of other media. You can absolutely do it. You might not be great at it, but you'll be competent at it. And you can at least get into doing YouTube videos or TikTok videos or whatever. And you find a way to go ahead and integrate what you already know in radio and take it to another medium. And there was many times where radio people got to learn how to be on television, because there's a lot of people now that come in the radio that are camera worthy, that they are attractive to be on camera. If they can find their way to go and work in radio, and then they get noticed through their social media, through whatever else they're doing, then eventually they can find their way into doing something else that will further their career. That radio can be a stepping stone, a launching pad. So there's a lot to overcome in terms of obstacles in the space, but at the end of the day, you can get there. Radio can give you that room to get there if you can do it, but you got to understand the environment, the corporate environment that's out there of the companies that are operating stations. Maybe you have to find a way to go and get to know somebody that knows somebody, and you find your way to move up the ladder. It can be done. Or you have to build that organically, which is very difficult, but can be done. I'm not going to dismiss it. It can be done. Now, being in the business as long as I have, of course, I'm going to be cynical. And let me tell you, there's a lot of people on the radio that are very cynical, and they just have a mindset of how things are. We have our opinions on our chest. We're not afraid to go and express them because we're in the radio business. We're in the communications business. We're not afraid to go. You can know what to say on the air and know what you're going to be able to say within the rules and parameters of the FCC, but then off the air, you'll say whatever you want. We're very brash, bold, very outspoken people. And we can also be very entertaining at the same time. Just make that point clear too. So there's the ebook. Like I said, I'm not getting anything out of this, but go to radiocopywriters.com and you can find the book, Sound Advice, A Guide to Navigating Careers in the Modern and Future Radio Digital Media Landscape. So interesting 40-page read. Check it out for yourself. See what you think. And I hope that some of my comments might help, give a little context and a little bit of background to what's going on here. So I thought it'd be a little bit more negative and a little more cynical, but I wasn't. I think I was being very constructive. I think it was the best way to go ahead and handle this. So good. A couple of stories I want to bring up before we're going to wrap things up. Specifically, go to the FCC. Brendan Carr right now. He talked about in South Dakota, when he traveled there, about the Build America agenda for the FCC. So focusing on high-speed internet and freeing up spectrum for wireless services. He also talked about the first votes and the ongoing delete initiative. And that the commission's already been eliminating obsolete cable regulations, no longer relevant or even applicable in today's modern marketplace. And there are rules of the books that are trying to go and get rid of and clear up. So there have been 77 rules or requirements, 8 forms, 27 pages, and almost 12,000 words taken out of the rule book for the FCC for operations. The National Association of Broadcasters are welcoming Brendan Carr's focus on updating media regulations to reduce burdens on broadcasters. So, meaningful regulatory reform. We know about the ownership caps. That's one of the things we're always worried about. More of that than ever. So, it's being worked on. Just keep an eye out for it. One other story I want to make sure to bring up. In California, we talked about it a few weeks ago about how there's a lot of movie and TV production that has been going away from California because the cost to be able to go and produce film or TV, even if you might have a lot of existing staffers, a lot of existing people that are behind the scenes that can work in the space because they live there, it just costs too much, no matter if there's a convenience to it. But there's been a new bill that's been passed right now to expand film and TV tax credits eligibility. So Assembly Bill 1138 has expanded the eligibility rules and benefits for California's film and TV tax credit program. It passed the state Senate, signed into law by Governor Gavin Newsom on Wednesday. This was passed 4 days before the next round of applications for TV productions looking to receive tax credit opens, expanding the types of productions that can apply for the incentive, including half-hour series, animation, and large-scale competition series. The new program includes a base rate for tax credit from 20 to 35% and raised a pre-production cap of $120 million. Credits allocated for independent productions have now tripled from $26 to $75 million. And the overall cap of this grant program has now expanded from $330 million to $750 million. So we heard it was going to be like this, but now it's come into law. It's now finalized. So now people can have this here that we might start seeing more film and TV production back once again in California. So that was done. That's a good thing. Another story I saw that it's been talked about a lot. I haven't talked about it much, but AI music on Spotify. There's been a lot of talk about this. I haven't really gotten to it much because there's a lot to get into about it, but there are plenty of examples right now, especially on Spotify, where there's AI-generated music being released by fake artists, and it's rapidly growing in popularity on music streaming services. And they talk about some of the artists here from Music Business Worldwide, about some of the artists that have been named that are available on a range of streaming services like Apple Music, Amazon Music, YouTube Music, and Spotify. There's an outlaw country artist called Entails that was verified on Spotify with over 1 million listeners. So, for instance, this particular AI artist might have been created with a product like Suno or Udio. And I forget which record company right now is already suing one of those companies right now. I think it was Suno right now in an important lawsuit about trying to go ahead and curb this kind of AI piracy right now, this AI behavior that's going on right now, because the music to the layman's ear, they're not going to know if it's AI or not. They can't tell the difference, especially if it's sound. They won't know if it is or not. And of course, then there's also the Velvet Sundown. That's also gotten a lot of play as well, with over 550,000 Spotify monthly listeners. People will never hear these people in concert. They'll never see what it is. They might see names or faces on these particular pages and profiles on Spotify or wherever it is, but they're never going to know who they are. They're just going to come in and do something. So all this here is getting to be a big thing. And it's across various genres. So keep that in mind too. It's happening now. I might just do a show just on this, but I mean, it's got to be much more I want to get into where I could talk more about it. I'm waiting for some more stories to come out that will focus on this more. But there are some now, but I might get down the line where I might actually going to talk about it a bit more. Speaking of court cases, there is a case that went in front of the Supreme Court where the Supreme Court agreed to make a major challenge to the legal precedent that internet service providers are liable for piracy by their users. There was a Virginia jury in 2019 that awarded record labels Sony Music Entertainment, Warner Music Group, and Universal Music $1 billion in a lawsuit against Cox Communications. It was later overturned by a federal appeals court, upheld, finding that internet providers are at fault for refusing to terminate connections that have been previously used for copyright infringement, but the amount of damages awarded in the trial wasn't justified. So the case is asking, who's responsible for the piracy? By the rights holders, they think that internet providers are liable for future infringement once they're aware of at least 2 instances of piracy, and they're refusing to throw a home or business off the web, essentially facilitating illegal downloading. So Cox Communications went back and they took their case all the way to the Supreme Court. And they got a petition set for review. So the U.S. Supreme Court is going to address these significant copyright issues that could jeopardize internet access for all Americans and fundamentally change how internet service providers manage their networks. So for Cox Communications, they're talking about the development from the Supreme Court supports their goal of protecting consumers, preserving open internet access, and ensuring that broadband remains a reliable resource for the communities we serve. Big story. Keep an eye on it. Because there are still court cases. There's still the one in Minnesota about ownership caps with the FCC. We don't know what's going to go on with that with the radio stations or media companies in general. This thing right now with AI, with piracy, there's still a lot of things which is all contributing factors to the digital disruption. As we talk about over and over, it's there, it's prominent, and you need to be digitally savvy across all areas of media. If you're going to work in radio, you need to be digitally savvy through social media, through streaming. You just got to know it. It's very important to go and be a part of that. Anyway, kingofpodcasts.com is where you can find all my content. Of course, like I said, I'll be on with Lou Pate on WPHT tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow morning when I record this, but I'll just play the broadcast and put it up for you to listen to over the weekend. Have a great 4th of July. Remember that content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.